Loud, nasty, the battle over right-to-work legislation isn't easily forgettable.
We are now about 3 weeks away from right to work going into effect, and 24-hour News 8 political reporter Rick Albin has been tracking the controversial law and is seeing a lot of activity right before that deadline is set to hit. Rick.
Sue, when right to work passed in December, unions were more than unhappy, complaining of a potential massive loss of members and consequently revenues for bargaining and political activity. So supporters lauded the chance for workers to have what they called a choice. What we're seeing now is what some lawmakers call a rush to avoid right to work. They marched on the Capitol and on the Romney building. Union members and supporters demanding that their voices be heard and that the rush to pass right to work be slowed. But as of March 28th, right to work goes into effect. The impact, according to union leaders, would be declining union membership. That may be so. If it is, it will follow a dramatic trend since the 60s that transpired without right to work, taking union membership from above 40% to less than 20% in just less than 5 decades. And there is nothing automatic about workers in union shops being able to opt out of paying dues.
The legislation, as written and passed, would only take effect when an existing collective bargaining agreement expires.
Which means whatever the impact of the law, positive or negative, it could be years before it is fully felt. In the meantime, some unions are rushing to get so-called buzzer-beater deals that would renew or extend contracts, some for 8 or 10 years. That would avoid the opt-out provision for the length of the contract, and that has some lawmakers questioning the proposed agreements.
So it's very unique. What are the taxpayers getting for this 10-year or 8-year contract in Wayne State's instance? What are the students getting? Was this just that's what they wanted and we're going to give it to them? That's not a very arm's-length transaction.
Republican Representative Tom McMillan is the chairman of the Oversight Committee, and he wants to talk to Taylor Public Schools and Wayne State University about what he sees as longer than normal proposed contract extensions. And Representative Al Pasholka says if contracts are going to be extended for a longer than normal time, there should be a benefit to taxpayers. If not, that's when such contracts may get legislative scrutiny.
Just extending contracts to circumvent the law, I think that's when we're going to have to take a real hard look at.
But Democratic Representative Sam Singh sees the window to agree to contracts before right to work takes place as an opportunity.
And this is actually an ideal time for management because they have a higher hand, I guess, to work with their employee groups. We've had a couple groups who've actually come forward with substantial savings on health care costs.
Union officials like Paul Helder from the Grand Rapids Education Association warn of consequences from some people paying dues and others not paying dues in the same shop. Those consequences could be disastrous.
That the freedom to freeload information that's out there right now is going to cause people within the buildings to look at each other as host and parasite.
The GRPS contract expired last August, and there has been some suggestion a new deal could be in place before right to work kicks in. That, says Grand Rapids Democrat Brandon Dillon, makes sense. What doesn't make sense to him are people questioning unions trying to beat the deadline.
I find it ironic that the people who are complaining about these groups trying to extend their contracts or reopening their contract before right to works are going to affect are the very same people who didn't have a problem running the legislation through without a public hearing or a committee meeting.
No matter what the outcome of the individual contracts before right to work takes place, the renewed focus on a controversial piece of legislation is serving to open some very fresh wounds anew in Lansing. Brian?